morning. My name's Carol Mundy. I'm a naturalist in Cincinnati. I'm a research nut, I guess you could say that. I retired recently from Hamilton County Parks, where I was head naturalist at Glenwood Gardens. And I do a lot of talks on native plants, medicinals, weeds. In fact, it's so nice to be talking about native plants today. Usually I'm talking about weeds as herbs. Now, if you Google those, you're going to get a picture of a weed that's not exactly what I'm talking about, but it's native somewhere. Okay, let's get going here. All right, first of all, you need to know I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical researcher. I'm not a pharmacological researcher. I'm just a research nut. I'm a nerd. I get down the rabbit hole of scientific journals and peek out all of the little cherry-pick things. I'm the one you want at trivia night when they're doing things on medicinal plants or weeds. I'm that person. Across what is now Ohio, from forests and prairies, shore to shore, riverbanks, people collected and utilized plants long before the Europeans arrived. The native people passed down their knowledge, often through oral history. Nothing was really written down. And when the Europeans came, they brought seeds, they brought plants, they brought tinctures and decoctions. And if they couldn't find the plant they were looking for, they tried to find a similar plant out in the wild. And when that didn't happen, if they were lucky enough to be in a community where they were communicating with the people living here prior to their arrival, some of that information would have been shared. I know your history books are full of politicians and warriors, but it always wasn't that way. Especially with the ladies. No offense, guys, but often ladies, especially if it had to do with childbirth, information would have been shared back and forth. Right. All right, so we all know of some kind of folklore surrounding plants and the way they were used medicinally. As the methods have become more scientific and chemists are able to synthesize some of these chemical compounds, they've moved away from the historical use of botanicals. In fact, then they went way to the other side and said, oh, you know, don't use that pokeweed, it's dangerous. Don't use that willow, it's dangerous. And now we're back to the other side again, where we're reassessing because of the scientific breakthroughs, because of all of the chemistry, we can tease out those little compounds and go, that's pretty interesting. Maybe we should look at that. So my talk starts with what if? What if the person with the mind of a scientist and the heart of a healer asked that question, what if? What if that plant really does have medicinal qualities? What if there's a compound within it to effect a cure? And then the last part of that would be, what if we ignored that? And from a pharmaceutical point of view, if I can get you to buy commercially made aspirin and tell you, oh, don't use that willow bark, that won't work, I've got a monopoly on the market. All right. Yeah, everybody knows about willow and aspirin, or do you? Or do you? So salicin is the product that's in willow, and that's teased out a little more to make salicylic acid, synthesized in 1897, but this will knock your socks off. That's what it came from. So while they were working with willow originally in Europe, they teased out salicylic acid from Queen of the Meadow, which is our Queen of the Prairie's European cousin, almost identical in chemical components. And Felix Hoffmann teased it out of this to start the process because the use of salicylic acid as a pain reliever was really toxic on the body, especially hard on your stomach. So Hoffmann, working for Bayer, you know where I'm going with this, he used acetyl to change that product, and it buffered it a little bit. So now you have Queen of the Prairie really missing out in the limelight. Everybody goes, oh, willow, oh, it was willow. But salicin appears in so many different kinds of plants. Just to give you an idea, salicin is naturally found in willows, of course, cottonwoods, aspen, Wintergreen has methyl salicylate. Desmodium, which is tick trefoil, tick trefoil. Black haw viburnum, white birch has it in there. And how about some of the foods you're already eating? Radishes, olives, almonds, broccoli, mushroom, spices like curry and cumin and turmeric, and herbs like rosemary and thyme and cilantro. So there's this little bit of salicylic acid in there. And one thing I really found was very interesting is it says salicin is found in castoreum. Castoreum is what comes out of the gland at the backside of the beaver's tail. It's that scent gland that they use for marking and that trappers use when they're setting bait. And I'm thinking, now how in the world is it in there? What does a beaver eat? Willow. So, well, what's interesting about Queen of the Prairie is that besides it missing its claim to fame, it is also edible, and I don't know if you've ever tried it. I'm amazed when I look back over my life what I have tried and tasted that I'm still here. I think I've only had my stomach pumped once in 6 decades. That's pretty good. Well, I found a recipe that called for Queen of the Prairie fritters. Hey, anything dipped in sweetened batter is going to taste pretty good, right? I'll tell you what, that is so bitter. Most of you in here are probably of the age where at some point you had to dissolve an unbuffered aspirin in your mouth, or you might have had aspirin powders, how bitter they were. I don't care how much sugar you put in that batter, it's not going to taste any good. Don't eat it. Okay, so let's go back and we'll just kind of sweep that under the rug. So Queen of the Prairie missed her time in the spotlight. All those beautiful cotton candy, wonderful blooms. All right, so let's look at willow. And like I said, y'all know about willow and aspirin. There's about 400 different species of willow across the globe, and every one of them has salicin in it. And this has been in play for fever reducer, reducing pain from a broken bone, childbirth, toothache, whatever. Whether it was chewing on the twig or taking making a powder out of that, making a tea, it got used a lot. And yes, it has been proven to have anti-inflammatory, analgesic, so that's reducing pain, and antipyretic, which means it's a fever reducer. It's used less and less today. We have all of these other products. But I want to tell you something about the name. So A stands for acetic. SPIR reverts back to spirea, which was the former name of Filipendula, queen of the meadow, and IN was just a suffix that got added on to a lot of aspirins. So queen of the meadow, queen of the prairie, when you see aspirin, a little tip of the hat, it's in the name. Now, Bayer tried to patent both aspirin and the name, the compound, and the name. They had a patent that ran out about 1917. Then anybody could make it. And they went back to court and they said, but wait, we're calling ours aspirin. They can't. Now, in this day and age, the court would probably rule in your favor and make you come up with some other kind of name. But aspirin is the generic compound, and it's teased out from willow. Now it's actually made chemically.
So Queen of the Prairies is spirea?
Originally, that was its genus name.
But it's not anymore.
It's not anymore. It's a Filipendula.
Sorry, I missed that.
And that's okay. That's why we, scratch things in our books and have to buy new books.
Is that perhaps why the shrub is called false spirea?
Very possibly. It has that look. Good point. All right. One thing about aspirin, because of its effectiveness, it's listed on the essential medicines for the World Health Organization. To me, that says a lot. If a medicine has survived that long, still in play today, you can buy it anywhere. It doesn't cost very much. It's still a very effective medicine. It's used as antiseptic. It's used as an acne treatment. So all those commercials you see for those derma products, guess what's in it? Salicylic acid. I would caution you that if you're using it on your skin, it shouldn't be more than 2 to 5% at the most, maybe even 2 to 3%. If you're going for a chemical burn, guess what? That's going to be about 20%. If you're trying to remove more warts, probably 25 to 27%. So this product is 20 That's going to peel the top layer of your skin off, and you probably don't want to do that. All right. New research is finding that there's a plant in India that's that desmodium, which is our tick trefoil. That desmodium contains a salicin that is showing progress or showing promise as an angiogenic. In other words, it's keeping tumor cells from building up new blood vessels. When a tumor forms, it has to have a blood supply. So that particular level of salicin from that plant is being used in research to keep those tumor cells from being able to produce new blood flow.
What's the name of it again?
Desmodium, tick trefoil, well, it's Desmodium is the genus name in India. I don't know specifically if I wrote that one down. Gangeticum. All right, flowering dogwood. This one gets a lot of play because if you reading anything in history, you talk about the Civil War, people always say, oh, it has quinine in it. It was used as a treatment for malaria. True, it was, but it contains no quinine. It contains no quinine. So both, this is our flowering dogwood and the cute little bunchberry that you can find in northern Ohio. They do have two other compounds, and those would be betalainic and uracilic acids. Those are both derived from the dogwood, and those are showing progress in keeping that plasmodia. That's what causes malaria. It's not just the bite of a mosquito. That mosquito is transferring this parasite into you. The parasite then makes you the host and reproduces. So this is actually showing progress against both Plasmodium and Leishmania, which is that's really a bad parasite in other parts of the country. One of the things that really caught my eye was these two other compounds, camphorol and quercetin, and those show up in quite a number of other plants. The camphorol is an antioxidant, so that's a good thing to have, but that's showing in research that it inhibits the cell growth without damaging normal cells. That's really important. We all know that chemo is already poison in the body, and you don't want to kill off the good guys as well as the bad guys. So here research is working on that so they can target that particular growth. Quercetin is also an antioxidant, and you're going to find that in other plants that you're already consuming. Onions, green tea, apples, kale. Well, I don't eat kale, you might, but and that one is also showing good promise as an anti-inflammatory. And there is another type of naturally occurring chemical, I don't think I even wrote it up here, but it's called nonoscane. And it is a pheromone that's in the plant. And all of these different chemicals I'm telling you about, these are all products within that plant to either tell the plant to get ready for reproduction, protect it, or send up new growth. And you think about that when you brush by a tomato plant and it feels kind of moist and it has a very distinctive smell, that's the plant's putting out a chemical that says, don't eat me. And that's what this is doing. So salicin is a plant hormone. We're just using it in a different manner. This quercetin, that's another hormone, and then that novocaine I was telling you about. What's really interesting is it turns up as an insect pheromone. So the mosquito that carries malaria, the female mosquito puts that same pheromone out to draw in males. And then a moth that we have here in Ohio, the white-marked tussock moth, you've probably seen that with all the hairs, and they have little patches of like 3 white bars. The female never flies. She puts out that pheromone into the air, and the males come in and swarm her. The research that I did shows me that these two insects, I mean, mosquitoes, males may go for nectar, forage for nectar. The larva of that moth does not consume any plants that contain that plant hormone. So here you have these things all woven together, same chemical. So, pretty interesting. You're going to have so much fun at the cocktail party when somebody brings up a topic. Okay, how about pokeweed? Remember the song, Post Salad Annie, Gators got your granny? Okay. Well, poke salad is not salad with a A-L-D. Poke salad was the collection of the young plants. This is my yard, by the way, looking across at the neighbors who are probably going, oh my God. It is a native plant. I think it's quite beautiful. But what was eaten was the young shoots and the young leaves. However, they had to boil it, throw the water away. Boil it, throw the water away. Why? There's so many other things out there to eat. Why would you want to take that chance? And it was used, if you're all familiar with the Lloyd Library, I do encourage you to go and talk to, Alex is here today talking about the Lloyd. This was a botanical that was widely available in the late 1800s, even up until the mid-1900s. It's kind of a succulent, you know, if you've had it in the yard. You don't want to hang your wash out because the berries are kind of bad. But pokeweed contains saponins and glycosides. So any plant that you read about that has glycosides, that's a bad thing. You don't want to be eating a whole lot of that. Saponins, we already consume some of that in many of the other fruits and vegetables. It's in all kinds of different grain products, so you might be washing it off of that. Quinoa is a good example. They tell you to wash it and wash it and wash it because the saponins are there. All right, so what they're finding, looking at the research now, they've got two different things. They've got promise against viruses and fungi. So you have the situation where they're using this to stop the replication of the herpes virus. This is major. This is huge. It could also wipe out all of the pokeweed on the planet if we decided to go that route. What happens with the research is that they identify it in that plant, and then they try and synthesize it. And I don't know if things are as good chemically synthesized as they were back to the regular plant. And so then you get into this kind of vicious circle where we take it out of the wild and we use it for medicine, then it's rare in the wild, so then we have to synthesize it, and it kind of repeats itself. All right. I do want to tell you about, once in a while there is a poisoning that happens that makes the news. The last one was pretty big. This was 1980. 52 people at a day camp. They were studying the pioneer times and they made a poke salad, even though they followed the washing and dumping the water and so on. 52 campers and counselors were affected. They ended up, 18 of them went to the local emergency room. 4 of them were hospitalized for 2 to 4 days with protracted vomiting and dehydration. So, when you read that in the description, I think I can just look at this plant without putting it to use.
My mother-in-law came to the house once, and she was like petrified when my kids were small that if they touch them with their hands, it's dangerous.
No. And actually, an adult swallowing about 10 berries, that might be enough to make you start coughing up or coming out the other end. The young leaves and the shoots, as I said, they had been edible. Touching that plant, some people may have a little dermatitis because of the sap, but I had my oldest daughter, who's now 38, when she was about 2, came in and she had pokeberries in this hand and poke color all over her face. And I'm panicked because I lived way out in Brown County, Indiana. The closest doctor is 10 miles. The closest hospital is like 45 minutes. They're like, oh, give her some Ipecac. I don't have any of that in the house. Give her some soap that you've diluted. So I make the poor little thing throw up. She hadn't eaten any of them. She was putting them on as lipstick. But yes, we all have gardens full of poisonous plants. It's just a matter of education and how you're utilizing them.
To go back a few paragraphs, as you were talking about synthesizing the active principle in a plant, reminds me, to go back to willow bark. I've read that some think that the willow bark tea works without upsetting your stomach because there are other compounds in the bark.
In the bark itself.
That naturally. So when we extract the active principle, we've left all those behind. And I used to work in a pharmacy, and the pharmacist said to me once when I was talking about different medications, and I'll say the active ingredient here, and then here's the inactive ingredients, and there's this whole list of things. Well, the inactive ingredients don't always match from one brand to another.
Right.
And he said, yes, he said, you may very well have one of the medications may not work for you or may upset your stomach or something, whereas the other one might be okay, because even though they're
Proprietary.
active ingredients, they may be doing something to
Right.
interact chemically with the active ingredient.
And when you're consuming the willow bark tea, you're not, if you take the willow bark, dry it and grind it, or you take the leaves, allow them to dry, grind it, and mix that powder directly, if you brew it as a tea, you're not going to be consuming as much as if you powdered the bark down and snuffed it. Yeah.
So just a thought.
All right, wild geranium. I love this plant. It's so easy to grow. It persists well into the season, depending on where you are. That's my front yard one spring. This is another plant that was widely used as the botanicals that Lloyd had. And actually, this is, did you know we have an Ohio medicinal garden up at the governor's mansion? If you go and look at that, a few years ago, I worked with Hope Taft and the Pharmacists Association of Ohio. And if you go into the carriage house, that's my display from the items that the Lloyd gave us to put in there. So this was used as an astringent. So it's going to help dry up, you know, if you have an itchy spot, if you have hives, if you have a mosquito bite. The plant dried would have been used as septic or hemostatic. In other words, it stops bleeding. So you would take some of that and dried and put it onto the wound. It was also used on the other end to treat piles or hemorrhoids. And this one is a really interesting. They took a decoction of the fresh root and washed the genitalia of those who had VD. So there's quite a number of tannins, and tannins are going to help dry up. If you have something like poison ivy and you go and buy a product off the shelf, there's probably tannic acid that's going to be drying out that top layer of skin to reduce the oil that's causing the problem for you. This plant also contains that quercetin and camphorol that I talked about in the dogwood. It's used as an inoculant in tobacco plants against viruses. So here you have one plant protecting another plant from viruses that would take the tobacco out of production. It's also showing promise to inhibit E. coli, Pseudomonas, Staphylococcus, MRSA is one of the Staphylococcus. And so you have all of these other processes that they're trying them against. An extract is also shown to be toxic to insects, and it's also used in a louse treatment for humans. Now, I think I'd rather smell like wild geranium than pine tar if I had to delouse myself. Oh, and I think there's bonus points. Yes, bonus points. So the essential oil is being used as a larvicide against mosquitoes. Yes, this is Bosley. You know the commercials late at night and they talk about hair replacement, Bosley, I don't remember, Hair Club for Men it used to be. Well, you can buy Bosley's Renew Dry Shampoo and it has wild geranium in it. Meyer's Cleaning Day products also have wild geranium. If you go and buy geranium essential oil, it's probably not the native geranium here. You want to look on the list to make sure it's geranium maculatum, because most of the geranium essential oil that's on the market is from a European or Mideastern variety. I'm not telling you to use these products, I just think it was pretty funny that Hair Club for Men. Okay, so liquid ambar, sweet gum. The chewing gum, by allowing that sap or rosin or balsam, whatever you want to call it, to harden just a little bit, it was chewed to freshen the breath. It also helped if there were mouth or throat ulcers. Research is showing lots of activity against Staphylococcus, Pseudomonas, and Listeria. But here's the big news. Tamiflu. Tamiflu was synthesized by utilizing that shikimic acid that's in the green seeds. They also were able to tease out that acid from star anise. You're probably familiar with that if you use any of that in cooking. Really wonderful scent, kind of a 5-pointed star-shaped seed. And do you remember when this first came out and we were having problems with different varieties of flu and there was kind of a panic about where we're going to get it? The reason for that is they were only utilizing the star anise fruit and they couldn't produce it fast enough. So they're utilizing both sweet gum and now they're a chemically identical compound that they're using to produce this. How many of you knew that about Tamiflu? Anybody? Ah, see, you'll be real popular at the club the next time talking about that. New Jersey tea. This is a little underutilized plant. It likes kind of the edge where the sun is. And why is it called tea? Because it was substituted for black tea. The chemical compounds are showing good antimicrobial activity against mouth pathogens. So if you're making tea or you're chewing the leaves, they do tend to have a little bit of a kind of a wintergreen scent. And I like the fact that it said, makes a stimulating tea but contains no caffeine. This was also used as a treatment. Now in this case, the root was dug and astringent was made, but it was also used as a treatment for VD. If you go back and read the history books, when you're looking at medicine, my goodness, between that and parasites, we don't talk about this much in polite company anymore, but it was a big deal back then. Also used as a fever reducer, digestive aid, and you think about if it has wintergreen, we often take stomach upset medicines that have a wintergreen flavor. It's that methyl salicylate that's in there. That's what's in Pepto-Bismol. That's a whole nother talk, how those are out there. Another compound that's in this plant promotes clotting. So in the case of a wound, that type of thing, they're utilizing this extract to promote clotting. Spice bush, I love this plant too. In fact, I had 2 slides and I had to reduce it down. I think it's gorgeous fall color. It's so pretty in the spring. The flowers are kind of tiny and it's really great for pollinators. Native Americans used a tea, as did the Europeans who moved in, and then what we would say the pioneers used the tea leaves of the spice bush to treat colds, kind of as a spring tonic to feel invigorated. And the bark tea was used to expel worms. And that's another thing, like I said, parasites, that was a big deal. Anything, you know, if you were to drink enough of regular tea, that would probably flush those through your system if you had some intestinal worms. Park Davis, a name that you know from medicines, was selling different types of spice bush preparations. You'd buy either the bark or the dried leaves or the berries, take them home, either grind them yourself and use them that way. What's really interesting is a research project I read from 2014. They were looking at promoting this as a replacement for us using black tea or green tea or white tea. It's all the same plant. And the reason for that is they were saying that green tea contains high amounts of aluminum, fluoride, and oxalates. I drink a lot of black tea, so who knows, maybe that's my problem. The other thing is they're saying that imported green tea or black tea may be contaminated with pesticides, heavy metals, and so on, since we don't really know the resource. But that also puts this plant in danger. If we can't get black tea, then do we go and strip our woods of spice bush? You gotta find that medium in there. They're also using the compounds. Part of that scent that you know is spice bush is a defense mechanism so that the other herbivores, deer and so on, won't eat it. Now obviously, if you're a spice bush swallowtail butterfly, you're going, yum, this is really good. And they'll work their way through it. But that's what that wonderful scent is that's on there. Oh, an essential oil from the leaf is showing antimicrobial activity against candida, which is a fungus that plagues humans all over the planet. Northern pitcher plant. This is probably one that was nowhere in your radar. This is really a gorgeous plant, but again, telling you about this and the way that it was used, is that why we have so few areas around Ohio? Granted, it has to do with the habitat. That was in my backyard years ago. It's not growing quite as nicely anymore. But here's what's really interesting about this. This product serapin is a compound derived from the northern pitcher plant. If you go in for an injection for a trigger point, sciatica, a back problem, or if you own horses, this may be the product that they're using. And they're finding that it has basically no side effects because it's not a steroid. So now when I asked my doctor, I had an SI joint injection last year, what was it you used, to see if that's what it happened to be. The Native Americans used this to treat smallpox, which unfortunately were not here until the Europeans came. It was also used for treating lung and liver ailments. A dried leaf tea was used to reduce fevers. A rootstock was used as a diuretic and an appetite suppressant. And an infusion of the rootstock was used to help women in childbirth. And the intact leaves were often picked on the way because they were a drinking vessel. Now there is a fluid, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with the way that beautiful little vessel works, but so you have this nice little cup that's fully enclosed, and there's downward pointing hairs. A little bit of water and other minerals are in the bottom, and on the bottom side of those hairs are tiny drops of nectar. So the fly or the beetle gets in, he gets that little treat, and he can't get back through there, and he goes down and digests in the fluid at the bottom of the cup, and then that helps that plant get enough of the protein and the fat that it needs to go through reproduction. You didn't know we were going to be talking about sex today, did you? This product is approved by AMA, so the American Medical Association, and the Federal Drug Administration. White snake root, this is one that's, everybody kind of discounts this plant. Oh, you know, it comes up when the asters and the goldenrod bloom. Yeah, it kind of takes over that field, no big deal. Yeah, I heard it's toxic. It is, it's extremely toxic, but I still have it in my yard. I'm not going to be eating it. You'd have to eat a fair amount of it before it becomes a problem. And you might know this plant if you've done any reading about wicked herbs and bad responses. This is the plant supposedly that killed Abe Lincoln's mother. So Nancy Hanks Lincoln was killed by milk sickness. And my guess is, and I don't have any scientific proof, but my guess is she was maybe feeling a little poorly. And what did she do? Maybe she went and made a cup of warm milk and went to bed. She got some tummy rumblings. She probably ended up with a headache. She might have started vomiting. So what did she do? She repeated her little ritual of drinking the milk. And what happens is this plant comes up at the end of the summer. So if you had cattle, if you had your milk cow and they weren't getting enough grass, they might have moved into the edge of the woodland and now they're eating anything that's green. And the toxin that's in this plant bioaccumulates in the milk fat. So the cow herself isn't necessarily ill, but she's passing it through to her calf and to you. Now, why don't we hear about this? Because this still exists today. It's not taken out by homogenization or pasteurization. Does anybody know why we don't hear about this milk sickness? Do you have a cow at your house? Do you know where your milk came from? No. On the side of the bottle, does it have the names Daisy, Betsy, Bella? It doesn't have the names of the cows or who it came from. You have 10,000 sources. So basically, you might be getting a little bit of this in your milk, but it's so incredibly diluted that unless you watch the cow eat it and you milk that cow and you drank the milk, the chances are you're not going to have a poisoning case. It is incredibly toxic. In fact, it says, you know, no part should be consumed. But the chemical or medical field are researching this, and they're looking at the way it is cytotoxic. So it's killing off the cells of bronchial and pulmonary carcinomas. Again, that's really a fine line. You want to kill the bad guy, but you don't want to damage the healthy cells. So even when we hear something that's, oh, it's incredibly poisonous, we shouldn't touch it, that doesn't mean we should eradicate it from our habitat. It took quite a while before the timing of this was identified. Dr. Anna Bixby was noticing the poisoning or the sickness in children and adults at the end of that growing season. And she started studying that, and she wrote a paper, basically brought it to the medical board. Unfortunately, they weren't interested in that. Listening to her, it took quite a long time before it was identified. If you ever hear of the disease called the trembles, that's what they're talking about, because you have a stiff gait, but you're very unsteady, sweating, vomiting, your heart is racing, there's delirium, and then you go downhill pretty fast after that. So I grow this in my yard. I leave it where it is. I educate my family. Nobody's consuming it because it's a really good end of the season nectar source for pollinators. It's not like I have 10 acres of snake root. And despite its name, I cannot find anything. And I have Daniel Moorman's Ethnobotany, which weighs about 5 pounds. Going back through the research, I cannot find a native people that were using it for that.
What was that Daniel Moorman Ethnobotany?
Yes, it's his last name is Moerman.
M-O, okay.
Yeah, Daniel E. Moorman.
M-O-E-R,
Moerman. Daniel Moorman.
and his book was?
Native American Ethnobotany. And seriously, it weighs like 5 pounds. It's about this big and about this thick, and the pages are almost like tissue paper. It took him about 11 years to compile that. You can look it up by the name of the plant, you can look it up by the name of the tribe or the people that used it, and you can look it up by the disease or the complaint. It cross-references. It's an amazing resource.
Is it a book that's readily available, or do you have to hunt?
You probably have to hunt for this one. And have a bit of money in your pocket, because it's quite costly. And this is another one that gets kind of sidelined. Now, you probably came in today thinking, oh, we're going to talk about echinacea, and we're going to talk about all these other medicines I already know, and I really wanted to try and turn that on its ear a little bit. So if you look at arborvitae, this is one, again, prepared by the Lloyd brothers, selling the extract, and it was used as an antiseptic wash, reduction of swollen lymph nodes, and the reduction of growth of proud flesh. Now, unless you're a veterinarian, most human doctors don't talk about proud flesh, but we see it in horses a lot. And what happens is, let's say you have a wound, and it starts to heal up, but then all the cells go crazy, and they multiply, and you have this big extra growth. It's like it can't turn itself off, and you have the cells just layering up and layering up and layering up. So the idea was this would reduce the proud flesh because you'd be killing off the layers of that epidermis that's growing on top of the wound. So the wound is closed, it's healed, but then you have this big ugly thing on top of it. You can still buy wart control, So you can use that, and it's very concentrated. You're using it on a tiny little spot. The essential oil and the compound in arborvitae is not something you want to put all over your skin in an undiluted fashion. You'll be burning the skin. If you're utilizing something like this Absorbine Junior, it has Thajunga in it, or Thajun in it, along with something like methyl salicylate. So you get that kind of cooling effect and then the warming. And what those chemicals are doing, sometimes also capsaicin, that's tricking your brain. Your brain is tricked into thinking there's heat. You feel cool and then you feel heat. And if you have chronic pain, joint that keeps aching, your brain is sending what's called bad pee. So it just keeps firing, boom, 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 boom. It won't go away. And when you utilize some of these products, it floods that nerve sensor and it releases it all at one time. But you perceive it as cold and then hot, and then it's kind of depleted for a little while. Now, of course, it doesn't take very long. A few hours later, you take a walk, you go down the steps, like, oh, and it's started up again. But that's how that tricks your body into thinking that it's gone. This also has, within the essential oil, it also contains coumarin. And you might know that as its medical term, Coumadin, warfarin. That's a blood thinning agent. That's also found in arborvitae. What's really interesting is that warfarin is a rat poison, but over here it's used as a, to keep you from getting blood clots. So it's that really fine line of what's poison and what's not.
All things in moderation.
All things, yes. Didn't George Burns say that? No, Mark Twain first, and then George Burns said it, and he added one cigar at a time. All right, so let's look at prickly pear. Another one a little off the beaten path. We do have this, if you didn't know it. I mean, you're here at a native plant conference. Surely you know that we have one cactus in the state of Ohio. Can you imagine the first Europeans walking around the state going, wait a minute, what is that? If they hadn't seen it in a book, they know what that was. All parts are edible. It's used both as food and as medicine. Has anybody ever eaten the fruit of the pads? What part? The whole thing? The spines? Right. I haven't tried this. I've heard that it's very kind of lemony tasting, lemony like asparagus. Well, for me, I'm probably one of the only people in this room who does not like asparagus. I keep trying it, roasted, boiled, baked. Sorry, even my adult daughter's like, Mom, I can't believe you don't like asparagus. It's a beautiful plant, I'll give you that, but I'm not eating it, I don't like it. The fruit juice from the tiny little fruit that's gonna show up on that prickly pear is quite tasty. I hear that prickly pear margaritas are pretty good. We'll have to experiment with that. The pad juice was used to treat kidney stones, and of course you gotta be really careful when you're handling these. As he suggested, it's best to just burn them off. Within the pad itself, in the stem, is kind of a sticky, mucilaginous juice, and that's actually used in people who are dyeing cloth, dyeing colors of cloth or fiber. So it's used as a mordant to make the other color fast, so it stays in there. To give you an idea now, that's an awfully tiny fruit. But if you were to get the fruit that you buy commercially, a medium size, and they call them pears, that's about 25% of your vitamin C in one serving. Let me tell you something about vitamin C. It's very heat sensitive. So if you go to the tea aisle and you buy something and it says rose hips, vitamin C, it might have had vitamin C, but as soon as you heat it up to make your tea, you've dissolved, destroyed the actions of that vitamin C. So if you want vitamin C, eat the fruit. If you want vitamin C from rose hips, eat the fruit. Some of them are a little more palatable than other, but don't make it into a tea and think it's gonna help you out.
How would you peel? It says raw peeled pads. How would you?
Well, there's a couple ways. He suggested you use some tongs. Okay, he suggests burning off, because it's not just the one big, it's not just the stickers you can see. Each of these little nodes has a whole bundle of tiny little glassine hairs, almost like the way fiberglass gets you. So what they suggest is that you're wearing gloves and you just take a knife, hold it down, and you're scraping them off. And then you're cutting the edge, because the edge of the pad is also gonna have these. Now the pads on these aren't gonna get much bigger than that. So maybe you practice on a commercially available pad from, like Jungle Gyms or Dorothy Lane and see. Because there's some that are considered spineless. And they don't have the big ones, but they have the bundles of the little ones. So you still got to go through with your knife and cut each of those little bundles out.
And if you get those suckers in your fingers,
Right, and just think about if you get them in your throat.
To pull them with tweezers.
Right.
And
Right.
they're a very aggressive plant.
In some places, right. I had mine ripped up and eaten by chipmunks this year. I have chipmunks they're like chipmunks on steroids. I've seen more chipmunks in my yard. All right. It is used as a skin and wound treatment, and this is actually being quantified so that it can help the granulation again. So when you have a wound, your body is sending in what they call granulation tissue, and that pathway in the brain has to keep going until that wound is healed up. And they're looking at the idea that not only does it keep the wound clean, but it facilitates that granulation to fill in. So that's a good thing. All right, butterfly milkweed. You're going to read so much about pleurisy root. I always hear that term. Pleurisy root was used for blah, blah, blah. Well, pleurisy was an earlier term for pneumonia. Today, pleurisy is just the inflammation of the outer lining or outer coating of your lungs. You get an inflammation or an infection in that outer covering of the lungs. The dried root was used, the fresh root was used and boiled or powdered, and we'd put into tea. Sometimes it was snuffed. I always wonder about that when you're treating a lung ailment with a smoke or an inhalation, which we do that, chemically controlled inhalation therapy today. Again, you could go in and buy this product off the shelf. You can still buy it off the shelf, but this has glycosides. You have to be, in fact, milkweed in general. Let me just, we'll just go to the next one. All milkweeds contain these glycosides. And so you have to think about what's the benefit. I'll read about people who will pick the young pods, you know, and they boil them or pickle them and eat them. But why? It's kind of like pokeweed. There's so many other things out there I could eat. Granted, if it was survival food, and now I have that knowledge, I'd probably try it. But why would you put yourself at risk? Glucosides, again, this is a natural chemical defense. Plants are masters at chemical warfare. That's how they stay alive. I mean, they have to come up out of the ground, they have to flower, find somebody to help pollination, whether it's an ant or the wind, keep from getting eaten until that cycle repeats again, until they make the seeds. We have about 13 species, I think I put a dozen or so, yeah, native to Ohio, and they're all glorious, beautiful. Some of them are really unusual, like the poke milkweed. Who named it that? Go back and look at it. All right, on the one before that, this is the rod of Asclepius, not the double snakes, that's Cadus. So this was the original form for medicine. Asclepius was the god of healing. And within the temple, Asclepius kept these snakes that supposedly would help cure those who were ill. And the group of people were called Asclepians. So the next time you're watching one of those medical shows and they show you with the two snakes on it and they say, yeah, that's a rod of Asclepius, you'll know that they don't have it right. All right. You can have topical contamination from milkweed. So if you're pulling it, cutting the pods off, you need to be a little careful with that. If you get it on your hand and you wipe it in your eye, it can cause damage. There is, in the medical research and the medical information, people have come into the emergency room because they've had, what happens is it causes this edema in the cornea. And that can be, not only is it quite painful, but if it continues, you will lose the vision in that eye. Other animals, just to put this out there, other animals affected by the glucosides, sheep, goats, horses, rabbits, and cattle, and fowl are part of that. Oh, and here's something else I read about the milkweeds. Those with the wide leaves have cardiac glucosides. Those with the narrow leaves have neurotoxins. That sounds like a pretty interesting party, doesn't it? All right, so now we're back to that kind of what if. What if? Thankfully, there are people all over the world. Like I said, I'm interested, but I don't have the scientific medical background to make all this happen. Thankfully, there are people out there doing it. But they continue to ask that what if question. They keep pushing the boundaries. And if you do go and read any of the scientific research, what was accepted as correct in 1957 or 1962 or 1972 may not apply today. So just because we used a product 60 years ago, 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, we're a little better at reading that chemical code to see how it reacts with our body. And I want to put a plug in for, as I said, the Lloyd Library. In Cincinnati, we have this gem, and it's amazing to me how many people who live in that area have no idea that this incredible library is there. They have the number of articles that are there. It was three brothers who started this pharmacy that really put Cincinnati on the map. They were part of the eclectic School of Medicine, which then was taken over by the medical college, and the eclectic using the botanicals was kind of pushed off to the sides. And if you have a chance to go to the governor's garden, you have to call and make an appointment. They usually have tours on Tuesday. But they have regions within the garden of all of Ohio. So you can see a lakeshore garden, you can see an Appalachian garden, you can see a bog garden. Have a chance to go and visit that. And I think that's it.